Well, it does look like the time may have finally come where the Washington Redskins may actually be changing their team name. And in this overdue time of heightened racial awareness, they aren't the only ones looking to make some changes. While all 5 of the franchises in North American pro sports that use some kind of Native American inspired name for their team have drawn some special attention in the last couple of weeks, 3 in particular have drawn extra attention and are looking to make some pretty serious changes, including baseball's Braves and Indians, and the team we'll start with, the Washington Redskins. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the Redskins name is offensive because, as you might be able to tell, I am not Native American, and so I can't speak for a group of people that I am not a part of, and know that 1/16th or 1/32nd that I have in me from 4 or 5 generations back doesn't suddenly mean that this is about me. But with the Redskins name in particular, there is just no way around the fact that it is a racist name. It's a word that dates back to the late 19th century, and was used to degrade and disparage Native Americans, and even was often used interchangeably with words like savage, just to give you some idea of where we're starting off. And while to some you might not think that it carries that same weight today, even still Dictionary.com still classifies it as disparaging and offensive slang and defines it as a contemptuous term to refer to Native Americans. Or I guess you could go with the best case scenario, which would be Webster defining it as a usually offensive term for Native American. But as far as the team that is as of right now called the Washington Redskins goes, they picked up the name exactly 87 years ago from when I'm recording this on July 5th, 1933. Changing their name from the Boston Braves in an effort to differentiate themselves from the National League Baseball team, the Boston Braves. And although you may have heard that they picked that name because their head coach and some of the players at the time of the change were Native American, the fact of the matter is that had nothing to do with it. Really, they just were going to change their name from the Braves, and this was apparently the first thing that popped into their mind. And while the current opposition and controversy over the Redskins name is certainly nothing new to anybody that's been following the NFL over the last few years, this is something that's been going on since at least 1960, with really the only major change coming in 1972 when the team decided to change up their fight song, which up until then had lyrics like "scalp 'em" in it. Yeah, it took them until 1972 to figure out that that wasn't okay. Outside of that, though, even in spite of the fact that part of the reason the team now plays in Landover, Maryland instead of Washington, D.C. is the racist aspect of the name, protests and complaints about it have fallen mostly on deaf ears for decades. And even with that, the only responses that they've really gotten are that the name just has too much historic value to the team and that they're just not going to change it, or even going so far as to say that they feel like that the name emphasizes all of the noble qualities they admire so much about Native Americans. Yes, they actually did say that they felt like their name, which is a racist term for Native Americans, emphasizes all the things that they admire most about them. And you might be thinking, well, that was probably from a while ago. No, actually, that particular gem was from a website that was put together by a PR team that the Redskins hired in 2013 to defend the name after President Barack Obama said that he would definitely think about changing the name if he was the one in charge. And that all coming as a response to a quote from earlier that year from team owner Dan Snyder saying that they would never change the team name. It's that simple. Never. You can use caps. Well, that certainly aged well. So now, at least if you haven't been following the news, you might be wondering, how does a man like Dan Snyder, who, speaking of definitions, is pretty much the definition of stubborn, end up changing his mind in just a few years to wanting to change the team name after a quote like that? Could it really be that the newly invigorated global fight against racism opened his eyes to the problem, and now he's decided to change his mind? Well, in a way, yes. And it all started just a few days ago on the 1st of July, when a group of shareholders and investors worth $620 billion, or just under 4 Jeff Bezoses, asked Nike, FedEx, and Pepsi to cut ties with the Washington Redskins unless they were willing to change their name. And wouldn't you know it, but a day later, out of the goodness of their hearts and a love for the size of their bank account, FedEx, the owner of the naming rights for the team's stadium, officially and publicly asked the team to change its name. And then later that same day, taking it to the next step, Nike took off all Washington Redskins branded clothing from their website. And then again, in the matter of just another 24 hours, the team released a statement announcing that it was going to begin a thorough review of the team's name. And so just like that, in the matter of 2 days, a handful of investors and 2 companies did what tens of thousands of protesters have not been able to do for a half century: Get the Redskins to listen. It is also fair to mention that while all this was happening, it was also made clear to Dan Snyder that he wasn't going to get the new stadium that he desperately wants in Washington, D.C. if the team kept the name. And while yes, to this point all they've committed to is to say that they are going to review the team name, and there's been nothing official saying that they are going to change it, plus there are still some skeptics that think this could just be a bunch of stall tactics, and them putting on a good face and just seeing if they can wait this out and slide under the radar and keep the name long term. But even at that, the fact that they now do actually seem to be listening and are at least going to review the name is actually pretty big progress from what we've seen over the last few years and the last few decades for that matter. And that, at least to me, is some really good news. Plus, on the optimistic side, Ron Rivera did come out over the weekend saying that apparently him and Dan Snyder had been talking about a name change for over a month, which does seem a little bit too good to be true. But he did also say that it would be awesome if they could get a new name by the start of the season, which again seems a little too good to be true, but it does make it sound like they are actually serious about this. And I mean, for what it's worth, Adam Schefter sure seems to think that this is pretty much a done deal. Now, there are two groups of people to whom this was not good news. The first group of people is the people who, upon seeing all the pressure that was being put on Dan Snyder, thought that there was a chance that he and his stubborn ways would just keep holding strong to it and eventually just sell the team out of a stubbornness of not wanting to change the name and sticking to his guns. So now seeing that he might actually be willing to change the team name just proves that he is more interested in holding on to the team itself than holding on to the name, which if you're hoping to see the Redskins be good, might not actually be the best news ever. And the other group of people are the ones that are so afraid of change and having to figure out how to say a different name after the word go, that they go onto social media and call people that are trying to fight for change and a more inclusive world things like snowflake and coward. Which you might point out are some pretty ironic names for them to be calling other people, but then again, these are the type of people who probably don't have a strong grasp on what irony is. And just in case you do run into any of these people who are still staunchly defending the Redskins name, they might point out that there was a poll done in 2004 that stated that most Native Americans were not offended by the name Redskins. And although they probably won't want to listen to any facts that don't support their side of the argument, it might be worth mentioning that that particular poll only polled 500 self-identifying Native Americans, which has some pretty inherent problems. And while under the best case scenario for them where all 500 of those people actually were Native Americans, in 2013, a large number of tribes and other Native American groups whose members totaled 102 million Native Americans came out against the name and were the ones that originally demanded the name change in that year. Now, while the Redskins have been deservedly getting the brunt of most of this attention, largely because they're the ones that needed financial incentive to actually get the ball rolling, the Cleveland Indians have also announced that they are discussing changing the name of their team. This coming just a year after the team decided to move on from the Chief Wahoo logo that had been at the forefront of the team's own controversy over branding and the naming of the team. Cleveland's baseball team has gone by the name Indians for over 100 years now, but that doesn't mean that you get to ignore requests for change, especially when they come from the group of people that you've been using as a mascot for all that time. And well, once again, I can't and won't speak to whether or not the name is offensive, and it certainly isn't racist like the Redskins name is. It still is a name that comes from Europeans getting so lost that when they showed up, they thought they were on the entire other side of the world. And then even when they figured out how wrong they were, they thought, we'll just keep calling them it, maybe no one will notice. And the third team that's been drawing a little extra attention is the Atlanta Braves, who were those very same Boston Braves that are part of the reason that we have the Redskins name today. And with the Braves again, there have been some talks about getting a new team name discussion going, but the main focus there has been making sure that they can get rid of the tomahawk chop motion that has been done at the games for a long time now. So with at least the Redskins and Indians looking at potential new team names, I thought I'd finish up this video with talking about some of the names that we've seen come out for these teams. And since with both of these teams, part of the reason we are where we are right now with them and their names is their overly stubborn dedication to tradition over the years, it seems only fitting that some of the suggestions and maybe even some of the leading candidates are old names from these cities and leagues. For Cleveland then, the big name that I've seen suggested is the Cleveland Spiders. And while at the face of it, it does seem a little bit hokey and maybe even a bit lame, and I can kind of see that, it was the name of Cleveland's baseball team from 1887 to 1899. So it does have some pretty cool historical relevance to the city and the game. Plus, I do think they could do some pretty cool things with the branding, even if it does take a little bit of getting used to. But with Washington, they'll probably have to get a little bit more creative, since just going back to the Braves name obviously isn't going to work, especially considering what's going on in Atlanta, and the fact that it, while would be a step up, just kind of would be missing the point entirely. So then the other two potential names that we've seen thrown around for them are the Warriors, and potentially going back to that old spear helmet, which again, using Native American imagery might not be the best idea, but if you are in pretty good communication with the Native American community and they're alright with it, then I do think it's actually a pretty cool looking helmet. And the other name, and personally my favorite of the ones that I've seen getting thrown around, is the Red Tails, which is a reference to the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, who were a group of fighter pilots in World War II that were mostly African American and Caribbean born. Plus, Dwayne Haskins seems to like it, so as long as they don't ruin him too quickly, that could be a pretty good option. Regardless of what names they choose though, something that is long overdue, so as long as they do it thoughtfully, this is a good thing and sign of positive change. And as far as I'm personally concerned, really the only bad or frustrating part of all this is the fact that the Redskins and Indians could very well get new team names before NHL Seattle has their team name. Yeah. Although for what it's worth, with all of this going on, I do think it's pretty safe to say that Totems is probably officially out. Because even if they do it right and are in strong communication with the Native American groups in the Seattle area, I don't think there's any way that Bettman and the NHL want to go anywhere near anything that has to do with that right now. With that said, as always, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, please do hit that like button down there. If you really liked it and want to see more of my stuff, please do hit that subscribe button. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on any of this news or any potential names that these teams could switch to. Otherwise, stay safe out there, be good to each other, and I'll see you next time. Peace.